The idea of this session is for us to share the ideas around innovation, what has been done, the learnings from it, and also the path ahead. We've had very good context setting so far. So I'm going to request each of our eminent speakers to talk about what has happened in their domains, in their countries, and how do we then set up a collaborative framework for taking it forward. I'm going to begin with you because I know Estonia was talking about digital citizenship at a time that most people were, struggling to wrap their minds around this concept. But give us a sense of where we are today.
So I would maybe first start to comment with what the Foreign Secretary mentioned of different regions having different approaches. I would actually say that Estonian approach is very much similar to what India is doing with DPI, which means that that we also think that public sector has to be the one which will catalyze things and which will set the frames. So that is one thing, and second thing is that we have come to understand something that has been mentioned very often over the last days in Raisina dialogue, that implementation is important, like Amandeep mentioned. Use cases are important, and even if I may be a bit provocative, then answering with all the digital transformations, then answering maybe two questions what aren't often answered are also important. Is that, and I would frame it in a way of DPI, maybe that I haven't heard yet answered, is that how does DPI bring votes, and how companies can make money with that. So in a sense that if we can answer those two things, I think it would be.
So I'll just stay with you. I'm going to ask you the same question which you were raising. DPI is public infrastructure, but innovation has to be led in many ways by the private sector, and innovation by private sector will have an element of return on investment. Are there examples that you'd like to share where it has worked well?
So there aren't any that many because this is a question that politicians keep repeating and coming back, that actually we have to answer that. But I would so in our case, access to banks was crucial, and with India UPI was crucial. So I think just to repeat and extend those success stories, I would re-emphasize use cases.
Thank you. Shriyanka, I'm going to come to you. SWIFT is a very interesting example of what was a legacy structure, and UPI and other structures which have emerged in recent years is seen as an alternate structure. Do you see complementarities and do you see some kind of convergence happening in the next few years?
Thank you for the question. I think I will begin with a little bit of a debate. First and foremost, comparing SWIFT as a payment system to UPI as a payment system is an absolute, end of the story conversation. So let's start with 52 years ago when SWIFT was born. It was before the days of the internet, before the word DPI was coined, right? Before the word decentralized was coined. But if you sit and reflect, we really hold the values of a digital public infrastructure, because in those days, banks were exchanging messages with telex. So it was the first case of digitization where a group of banks from the private sector came together and they created a cooperative, right? A cooperative structure which stood not for profit. It was not about return on investment. We do not make profit. Whatever we get into as profits goes back into the system to be reinvested in the trust, security, and resilience of the financial architecture of the world, right? And then SWIFT is really about information exchange. We do not settle payments. We move the information between two banks or two financial institutions who are identified by a digital identity, which is pretty much the BIC that everybody knows when they go to open an account. This was the first case of digital identity probably in the financial system. every time a bank came on this financial network, it was decentralization, decentralized node coming onto a centralized network, which had a level of trust, a level of security, a level of SLAs to meet, right, which built the resilience of the financial architecture over the years. And the information exchange did not power payments. It was trade, but trade is always backed by payments, right? So we do FX, we do trade, we do securities and payments. And it's really about moving FDIs, it's about capital flows, it's about powering digital economies. So equating SWIFT to a retail payment system is an absolute, misnomer. I think that is my first point.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Though I was talking about complementarity.
And that's, I think, complementing it is one part, but interoperability is the real piece. Because as Swift, we operate RTGSs of over 80 countries, but we also connect over 235 market infrastructures and market actors, right? So when you talk about banks, these are really market actors in these 235 plus market infrastructures, which are doing payments, capital markets, trade, and so on. So when these markets come onto the network, there is a level of standardization that needs to happen, and that's why Swift does a pro bono work of being the registration authority of the ISO 20022 standards. Because if we don't speak a common language in finance or in anything else, right? There is silos, there's non-standardization, there is fragmentation, and all of that comes with it. But when you talk about complementarity, that's a really difficult word. It's really about how money flows. So you have a big pipeline, then you have small pipelines, and then you have taps. So
It's like transmission and distribution, right?
Exactly. So it's really about how consumption takes place. So my phone, my wallet, mobile wallet is really the little tab that I walk through, and I interact with the digital public infrastructure in the jurisdiction I live. I am identifiable, I hold an account, and I want to, consume services of. But that is powered by businesses which rely on foreign capital that comes from a pipeline somewhere. So it's really about that story, which I think sometimes is very opaque. And I do want to, thank Samir Saran and the Observer Research Foundation, because over the last 3 days, that's really been my realization as well, because across healthcare, across defense, cybersecurity, and the financial systems, it's really all integrated. Data, research, and I'm going to stop there. But for whoever's been here for the last 3 days, it's pretty much of a realization.
Thank you. There's so much more to unpack on this, Priyanka. I'll come back to you. Sharing, if I can talk to you about your experience in Bhutan.
Thank you, and very good morning to everyone here in the room. I would like to start by reflecting a bit on the journey of Bhutan's digital transformation. I guess that many countries have a similar story. So I have been observing the digitalization or the digital transformation happening in my country for the last 25 years. And if I go back around 10 or 15 years, the term e-government used to be very popular, and the governments were trying to automate the public services. And when that was the case, many government departments or different organizations, they started developing IT systems by themselves in silos. And very soon, they found out that these systems were not interoperable. So there were difficulties when one system had to talk to another. So then in my country, for instance, they came up with a document called the EGIF, E-Government Interoperability Framework, in order to try and solve that. Then next, they found that payment was an issue. Often the public services were automated, but when there was a need for payment to be made, the people had to go in person to our office in order to make that payment. So then slowly the payment came on board. The central bank initiated a payment gateway system. Then more recently, the authentication was an issue. So digital ID became very important. So our government has undertaken a big project called the National Digital ID Project, based on the concept of self-sovereign identity. I have not been directly involved with the project, but from the news accounts, it has been quite successful. And as of now, our country has a population of 750,000, and more than 200,000 have been onboarded on the digital ID system. So what I'm coming at is, when we talk about digital public infrastructure, I feel these three are very key. One is the interoperability of the different systems. One is the payment system. The seamless payment, I think, is very important. And last but not the least, the data exchange, the payment, interoperability, and the digital ID authentication systems. I think these are very basic foundations that any IT systems need. And India, on the other hand, I think has been able to take a very holistic view when it comes to this. So with Aadhaar and India Stack and UPI, so I think this started maybe more than 10 years ago. So, and India has also, I think the credit for coining the term digital public infrastructure probably goes to India. I'm not sure. I remain to be corrected. However, I can definitely say that India's leadership on championing digital public infrastructure needs to be appreciated. India has not only given us this terminology or the concept or the framework to think about, but India is also willing to share its knowledge and also all the, the digital tools that have been developed around that. So if we really look at the human history, I think a lot of things, a lot of progress is based on concepts and framework. So I like this concept of digital public infrastructure, and that could probably be the one that will take e-government initiatives to the next level. And these foundation building blocks like payment systems, interoperability, and the digital ID is very important for innovation and entrepreneurship as well. I think that's where probably the next discussion on that would come about. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharing. That's good to know. I think it's very interesting that Global South is actually collaborating on similar ecosystems, because traditionally we've seen that a lot of these established financial systems were developed for the legacy economies, not for the growth economies, and the growth economies work on a completely different dynamic. So it's actually, we are living in an experiment at huge scale today. There's a reference to two words I'd like to emphasize, come to you on: innovation and interoperability. But I think we are entering, when we talk about interoperability, we get into the phase of data security and protection, because you're suddenly talking about billions of transactions of individuals who probably are not as aware of privacy as they should be. And now you suddenly see all these global bodies, private sector and others, who are looking at billions of transactions of the data of these people, and they see beyond the value they see in rare earths, minerals and gold, as it were. So how do we balance interoperability with protection of individuals, especially of the growth economies in our part of the world? This is something for you and also Shriyanka.
Privacy is definitely a topic that's very complex and nuanced, especially because, for example, Estonians by nature also don't want to wait. But it's with privacy, probably everybody knows the saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. I think it's very similar with privacy, that basically trust is like a gas, so that the more you have, the further you can go. So that's definitely essential. But maybe one practical approach that Estonia has taken and tried to advocate over the years in Europe as well is a principle of once only. many of in this room have heard about it, but the idea is that number one, that the data should be entered only once, and all the interoperability and people and organizations who then use this information, they can use it, number one, but they should never ask it again, which means that the data should always remain in one place. The second large layer, and that we could discuss hours about this, but I will try to keep it short, is the personal perception of the value of data, which means that people themselves also need to worry about the value of data, which also means that basically if every person could be able to sell their data, for example, in data marketplaces, they're basically to sell their behavior and habits to different organizations to use the data as money, then if they see that their data has value, everybody would be less willing to give it out for free. So that's the second pillar, maybe.
Thank you. Shreyanka?
So thank you for the question. I think first and foremost, fragmentation and interoperability are two sides of the same coin. You flip it. If you're small, you innovate faster, you run faster. If you're bigger, you have to think about all endpoints on the network. And it's about standardization, it's about scale, it's about growing your trust network. So scaling requires a degree of standardization, right? Now, to illustrate my point on digital public infrastructure, right? Let's look at the stacks. You have digital identity. It is pretty much a standardization story where we are at the moment. Because if you look globally, across individual identities and across business identities and corporate identities, there are over 236 digital identity issuing entities today. So that is really a cause of concern, right? Like, how do you map all of this and then bring it into the KYC system, into the FATF recommendations, and actually work through the process of identifiability, verifiability, all of that. Then you talk about digital payments, right? I think digital payments are like local bazaars. They have their own flavor. It's built for a market. But as you start accepting cross-border payments, when you start interlinking, whether it's bilateral, whether it's multilateral, into retail digital payment systems, you're opening a tap, a cross-border tap, a forex, capital control cap, all of those kind of things come in. And that requires a different degree of trust, resilience into the system, right? So it's really about these digital payment systems that have scaled, that are going into their next level of maturity, and now there is a degree of resilience that they need to adapt to really scale. And then we talk about digital transactions, right? Very related to digital payments, so I won't go too much into that. But the new coin flip in innovation is really digital assets, because this is about digital currencies, tokenized deposits, and how they're going to move across the public-private
CBDC,
infrastructures, right? So it's CBDCs, it's stable coins, it's tokenized deposits, and these can be closed-loop private ecosystems. These can be, public, issued on a public chain, and government-issued digital currencies, or they could simply be a token of exchange, right? Like stable coins, and that's where there's regulation, there's innovation, there's a whole lot of disruption, and different jurisdictions are approaching it differently. So that's a place to wait and watch. But even there, I think standardization is that flip, because if you standardize, you scale.
Yeah, perfect. So I'd like to take a couple of questions from you. There are mics on two sides. I think that one is sitting behind the pillar. But if you have a quick question, if you can keep it sharp and focused, I'd like to get the panel to answer. And you'll have to go to the mic. And while you're going, sir, you'll have to go to the mic on this side. We have to remember one thing, that when UPI and Bhim was being launched in India, certain companies, financial companies in US, went to their government and complained against India, saying that if this happens, our market and monopoly is going to be severely undermined. So we have to remember that what we have achieved today is against a lot of opposition from global financial giants. I don't want to name them, but many of you know about it, who did not want this to succeed. So what we see, I think, is literally the breaking of glass ceiling through an entity and an effort from the global south, which we have to remember that if they had their way, we wouldn't be talking about DPI today. Sir, please.
Hi, thank you for the great
Please introduce yourself and keep it sharp. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the great panel. I'm Babu Garg. I'm one of the US-India AI fellows for ORF. So I was kind of curious, if you think about like internet as kind of a parallel technology to DPI, you have kind of like the OCI stack, right? And you have standardized protocol stacks for each layer of the OCI stack. What is the analog for digital payments? Like you talked about, like, there's the 4 layers for identity, payments, applications, and assets, right? So in the analogy that I'm drawing with internet, you have ITF that is setting their standards internationally, right? So no one is coming up with their own sort of TLS or SSL protocol, right? Like, so it makes it easier to scale and makes it kind of convenient to build things out. What is the analog in the standard space for the DPI infrastructure?
Okay, so I think that question may require an offline answer as well from the panelists, but let me come to the two persons here. Please, ma'am,
Yeah,
please
thank you
introduce
very-
yourself. Thank you.
very much. So my name is Janet Salem, and I left the UN after a long time to work on integrating sustainability into digital public infrastructure and digital financial infrastructure. So my question is probably for Shriyanka or perhaps Inar, is how do you leverage DPI to serve societal goals like climate change mitigation? For instance, we're working on integrating carbon footprint data into financial transaction data. Do you see us collaborating more with the private sector to fuel that innovation first, or with governments to give the signal that DPI should be used for societal goals?
Thank you. I'll take the question with the gentleman and then we'll come to the panel and they can respond as if
Good morning.
Yeah.
I represent a private equity firm from New York. We are an institutional investor. Yesterday in the geopolitics conversation, I was not able to put the point related to the uncertainty which is being caused, which has led us to lose a lot of money. And I'm just trying to make a point here that how can DPI be more focused? Because from an investment perspective, if supposing we think in silos, like, Shriyanka, yesterday we were discussing, if SWIFT talks only about messaging between the banking systems, who will take care of the securitization aspect, which is my concern if I have to lend money? And similarly, when the lending comes from a UN perspective, Mr. Gill was there. My question to him was, how can we make, like, for example, right from 1992, when the Earth Initiative started, we have been speaking about Agenda 21 and the further MDG and SDGs. We currently have a national information framework also in India, in which SDGs information is being given, but how do you finance them? So that, decentralized financing from a perspective of, can I fund a health requirement in a certain municipality or a state? And how can that be funded by an institutional investor like me? And how does the DPI enable it? That is, some innovation I would like to have your thoughts about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, I'm not sure we'll have the time for giving you a detailed answer from the stage here, but perhaps you can continue that. But requesting sharing, Shriyanka and Inar, sharing first you, and then we come to Shriyanka and we'll close with you, Inar.
Yeah. Just 2 quick thoughts. Firstly, I would like to try and give my perspective on the question from there. If there is an analogy we can draw for DPI with OSI model, I'm not really aware of an analogy that we can draw. There is, if there is a universally accepted model like that for DPI. I think DPI as a concept probably as of now maybe understood a little differently by different people. I think the definition that is given by UN is much broader. So, when it comes to application, understanding for countries like mine, I would like to draw upon the definition that UN has given on DPI. So, as I mentioned earlier, I think that for me the 3 key building blocks would be the data exchange data exchange platform or the framework. Then that is for interoperability. Then the digital ID, which is very crucial for most of the digital systems. Then the third one would be the seamless payment across different platforms. I think I'll leave at that in order to give time to my fellow panelists.
Shankar.
So maybe I'll take all the questions one at a time. So first, on standardization, does DPI have a standardization? I think we're really maturing the concept, right? And if you look at the India Stack as a first mover and as the India Stack's openness to learn from other prevalent models, whether it's ISO 20022, whether it's the recent collaboration with FATF, I think that can emerge to become a standard in a way. So I think it's really about that openness to collaborate with intergovernmental organizations, with mature players in the market, with businesses, public and private sector collaboration, that there is a huge potential that India sits on as being a first mover of the DPI concept and having built that. On ESG, I think quickly, there is. You bring up a huge and very important point here. I think there has to be a degree of market regulation and understanding of how the DPI can impact long-term consequences. So if you look at 1.6 trillion DPI transactions in India, which is 40 times the next market, it's huge. And I see that there's lifestyle embedment of these embedding of digital payments, which is basically when you look at quick commerce in India, every item is a digital transaction, whereas in other countries you would bulk and buy 30 items. So there is that unbundling of lifestyle decisions that is leading to this exponential growth, right? But what does it mean, right? When you blink it or when you do a quick com transaction, what does it mean from an ESG perspective? These are conversations that will mature. This is a growing economy. This is where innovation is at its peak. But at some point, the ESG conversation will make a big impact, whether it's in plateauing or whether it's from a planet perspective, but that has to be on the table for sure. And then, just in terms of the equity question, I think, it's a very complex question. So I don't think I will be able to answer that correctly. But I think digital economies are what the DPI is building. And they are also data economies. So when you look at deep tier financing or restructuring of supply chains, this is really about having access to capital for really small and medium businesses. And that's where, collaboration helps, private equity speaking up this way helps. So I think I'll just leave it to that because I'm no expert to comment on that.
Thank you.
Okay. So maybe I will, since we don't have, again, a lot of time, I will address first two. So, and I will try to use the terminology of DPI. So I will try to quickly translate from Estonian to Indian. But basically, if the question regarding the layers, so I think it's not that complex. I would imagine it to be like the following layers. So infrastructure, and I will use the DPI words. So DPI itself, the protocol, then the platform. Then what you have, the DEPA or the data consent mechanism, and then use cases. So you can, that's always the simplified case what you can look at. And regarding the SDGs, I think I would emphasize two main things. I think it would be interesting to have an application on DPI for verification. So with SDGs, it's often important to verify. There are some cases in India where, using the pension system, you are able to verify yourself. So maybe that's also transferable somehow to SDGs. And second thing probably is that whether, so Estonia also has voting on our platform. So if voting would come first, I always think that priorities come at next layer. So if there would be a system where a lot of people can basically declare their priorities, I think that would be wonderful for all the SDG world.
Thank you so much. There is so much more to discuss, but we have many other conversations coming up. Please join me in thanking the panelists for sharing their thoughts and experiences.